Hi everyone, I'm Jeremy Goodwin, Head of Pensions at Evershed Sutherland. Thanks for listening to Pensions in a Pod, a podcast where we take a look at the latest developments in the pensions world. What we really wanted to share with you here is our insights in terms of what we believe really matters, what's really going on here. Happy 2026, everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of Pensions in a Pod. We're delighted to have you back. What a year 2025 was. So much happened. If you thought that was a lot, you wait till you hear what's in store for us in 2026. Now, I'm delighted to be joined today by three colleagues. So, partners Charlotte Cartwright, Stuart Earle, and awesome PSL Tim Smith, that's professional support lawyer Tim Smith, to help us talk through over the next sort of 10, 15 minutes or so the key things to think about in relation to 2026. Now, for those of you getting this by email, I assume all of you will, you'll also get alongside the recording the spree brief setting out some more detail in relation to what you've got to look forward to in 2026 coming down the track, and also the link to our UK pensions tracker, which please do download onto your phone, have day-to-day available to you for the latest information in relation to all the different developments coming through over the course of 2026. Before going into the sensible bit, I just want to say, for Christmas, I got a really good Rest is History t-shirt, and it was a brilliant thing that I'm enjoying very much. I was thinking about doing a Pensions in a Pod t-shirt for all our listeners. Now, what do you think if we were to go out to, do you think everyone would really enjoy that, a Pensions in a Pod t-shirt? Maybe. Answers to come back. We'll come back. Okay. So let's get on with 2026 and the pensions things to come. So Charlotte, turning to you first, if I can. So DB schemes, what's coming up for them in 2026?
Sure. So as you say, Jeremy, it's likely to be a busy year for many schemes. I actually have to say I was a bit worried you were going to ask me if I wanted a t-shirt. I'm slightly relieved I'm just talking about DB schemes. But yes, a busy year. Lots of schemes are going to be continuing, potentially ramping up their existing projects like GMP equalisation, general code risk assessments, dashboards. But we're also going to see a number of changes in the DB world, and those changes are largely split into two main categories. So the first are new mandatory requirements that schemes are going to have to grapple with. And here I'm thinking in particular about the IHT changes that mean that from April 2027, most lump sum death benefits other than death in service will be brought into the IHT regime. So during 2026, trustees are going to need to work through what the implications are of that for them. Now, those IHT changes, they were first announced over a year ago in the November 24 budget. Trustees are also going to be thinking about those limits on salary sacrifice contributions announced in the more recent budget. Again, a lead in time for those mandatory changes, and initially it'll be one for sponsors to work through what, if anything, to do about that from a benefit design perspective. But trustees will then need to work through what it means for the scheme and what they should be telling members. So that's the category of what I think of as mandatory requirements. There's also a second category of new tools for a trustee's tool belt, and in particular that new facility in the pension schemes bill, which will allow, in some situations, surplus to be returned to sponsors from an ongoing scheme, as well as the related announcement in the November budget of an ability to make one-off lump sum payments to DB members. Those won't be exercisable until 2027, but they're likely to feed into many trustees' planning in 26. Now, there's lots of other things we could talk about, so Virgin Media, responsible investment, net zero transition plans, etc. But that hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour for now. And needless to say, it's not going to be a boring 2026. Stu, shall I hand over to you there to talk about DC and hybrids?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. If I could have a hoodie rather than a t-shirt, Jeremy, that would be great because to keep me warm in January. But in terms of DC and 2026, I think we are at yet another tipping point in terms of the development of a framework and the level of detail that we are going to need to see, given all of the forthcoming changes that are envisaged for the defined contribution market, both from a trust-based perspective, but also from a FCA regulated sector perspective as well. And I think we can get a very good feel for what's coming down the track from the pension schemes bill, but also from the government's roadmap, which we saw and started to look into a great deal last year. And I guess what I'm looking at is if this is all related to the roadmap at the moment, what we're doing is making sure that the car is properly packed up and ready to go in terms of the level of detail and the level of secondary legislation and guidance that's going to be needed. And what I'm thinking about there is very much around the proposals and the framework in the legislation around assessing value for money, which is going to be relevant for all trust-based DC schemes and FCA regulated schemes. We're also going to have to be grappling with how DC schemes react to obligations around guided retirement and decumulation frameworks. We've got clearly in the bill a lot of detail more to come around the consolidation agenda and what that means for mega funds that we're going to see as schemes and master trusts target their 25 billion scale by 2035. I think so. What we'll see in 2026 is more detail around that and a great deal more focus from DC trust-based schemes that will need to be given, particularly around value for money and guided retirement. Briefly, though, also on the FCA side of things, on regulated pension arrangements and products, we are months away from targeted support going live in April this year. And that is quite a material change in terms of the level of support communications that can be given to individuals who've got pots in FCA regulated in their personal pensions, their private pensions, and how their options at retirement can be presented to them without it constituting financial advice.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks, Charlotte. That's fab. In terms of, you mentioned cars, the main kind of vehicle coming through for lots of the pension developments we're seeing in 2026, Tim, I guess is going to be the pension schemes bill. For our listeners, just a bit of an update in terms of where we are on that, what's expected and when?
Yeah, so the bill has completed its passage through the Commons, so that happened just before Christmas, and is now transferred across to the House of Lords. And it's due to start the committee stage at the House of Lords on the 12th of January. So it's making good progress, and we're definitely on track for the bill to receive royal assent in spring this year, which has always been the government's aim. But even when it receives royal assent, many of the provisions won't come into force straight away. And as Stuart alluded to, there's a lot of detail that we're expecting that will need to be set out in kind of implementing regulations. So I think we can expect a flurry of consultations in kind of late spring, summer on those implementing regulations, which will contain a lot more detail on a number of the reforms. It's also possible we might still see some amendments to the bill. Some have already been tabled in the Lords. So that's something else we need to keep an eye on.
Thanks, Tim. I think it's going to be really interesting to see through 2026 with some of the provisions we've seen coming through, but actually the practical implementation of them, I think is going to be really interesting to see actually how we do this stuff in practice. It's going to be really actually genuinely interesting through this year to try and actually work through these points. One of the ones, Charlotte, on the DB side, I think also links into DC with the hybrid schemes is use of surplus and the surplus provisions in the pension schemes bill. How do you see that working through in practice? What are we going to see on that?
So as Tim's already alluded to, we're expecting quite a lot to come through this year. And actually, I think perhaps an equally interesting question is, will it be a little bit too little, too late? Because actually the DWP's roadmap suggests that it will be 2027 before we have that legislation. We have the underlying regulations and guidance that we haven't even seen drafts of yet. And actually there's been murmurings in some corners that by then, for schemes with a material surplus, trustees and sponsors will have worked out what, if anything, they want to do about that. And we are certainly seeing, from a practical perspective, less so from a legislative development perspective, many trustees and sponsors not waiting for that legislation and using surplus in different ways, from meeting scheme expenses, as you say, funding DC contributions in scheme or through transfers to master trusts, and associated decisions like, do you have a different investment strategy for your scheme assets up to full funding and above that level? And all of that, I think, will continue on the outside, even when this new legislation's in force, because that 25% tax on surplus extraction to sponsors is going to mean that those other options might be more attractive depending on the level of surplus and the potential other uses. But I also think it's worth talking about the announcement in the most recent budget for that facility for one-off lump sums to DB members, because I think that's also going to be a game changer. Because as you know, at the moment, if trustees and sponsors want to pay additional amounts to members, generally they can only do that by increasing their pensions. And that increase will apply both in the year it's awarded, but also into the future with the associated costs. So this new facility to make one-off payments, that could give trustees and sponsors a really important additional tool in their tool belt. So alongside all of the legislation, the regulations, the guidance being developed, I'd expect those conversations between trustees and sponsors to start gathering pace around these new options.
That's going to be super interesting. Stu, so you've not talked for a little while, so I'll bring you in. We've talked about the sort of practical implementation of stuff. The entire question of value for members and what that structure looks like in DC land. Are we going to see more detail come through in relation to that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's pretty clear that there is a need to ensure consistency across schemes, particularly in DC, where members need to absolutely understand what they've got and how that compares with multiple DC pots. DC's been around for so long now. Individuals will have on average, 4, 5, 6 different, types of pot size, provision, coming from different backgrounds and industries, but the ability to actually compare and contrast what you've got just doesn't exist at the moment. So that value for money framework, which has been long trailed, but now we have the framework within the bill and more secondary legislation to come, I think is going to be critical. We've got value for money assessments, which will need to be prepared and published, not until 2028, but don't underestimate the amount of work that's going to be needed in order to undertake those assessments and prepare the analysis that's going to be needed to be published. And I think that's why, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to see secondary legislation and further guidance and documentation around this year into 2026, so that by the time we move into 27, which is when we're going to be needing to prepare those reports and look at those assessments, we'll have an idea as to what needs to be in there. Just to I say, we don't know at the moment. My suspicion is these are not going to be quick and easy assessments to undertake. There's going to be a lot of detail that's needed to show levels of performance, to be able to show that what's known as the metric data. So what we're looking at there is assessing quality of services, looking at asset allocations, looking at investment performances, looking at costs and charges, and bringing all of that together, benchmarking against the market to get comparisons to see how are schemes performing, and then schemes will themselves have to give a rating. Are they fully delivering? Are they not delivering at all? Which, by the way, is going to be a huge call for a pension scheme to say, no, we're not delivering. Or are they sitting in some sort of intermediate phase where they have to take some action or consider what action they need to take? And don't forget, all of these assessments need to be reported to the pensions regulator and also need to be publicly available. So I think it's really starting to put the spotlight on something which I suppose in past years it's been tucked away a little bit in chair's statements in DC.
Yeah.
Do members read it? Not entirely sure. Where you're now having to publish something so individuals can look at their different pots, look at how their schemes are assessing themselves and looking at the benchmarking. I think that will hopefully, from a strategic point of view, be great to help individuals understand what they've got. But look, if you're a DC scheme, a trust-based scheme, or a hybrid scheme with a DC section, don't underestimate what this is going to mean in terms of the level of review and assessment that's going to be needed.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. And even that intermediate stage, I think, is a bit tricky, isn't it, for people to end up in?
Oh, absolutely. If you stay there for too long, then the regulator will intervene. It's not just a nice holding pattern. There will need to be tangible steps taken and actions implemented to move you to a fully delivering status.
Thanks, Stu. Just thinking about sort of people being in a tricky place. So, Charlotte, from your perspective, and that is turning away from the pension schemes bill, if you were one role, one entity which you wouldn't want to be as you went into 2026, where are you expecting the regulator to be particularly focused this year?
I don't think there's one entity that I wouldn't want to be, but I guess if we look at the question, if you don't mind, from a slightly different perspective.
You go for it. Yes.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I'll be wearing my t-shirt at the same time, or my hoodie.
Yep.
I love that. You get asked one question. No. Let me answer another one. That's great. I'll bear that in mind for the next. Thank you. It's good precedent.
I think if we look at it though, from who's going to continue to be and it will be under the spotlight, I think it is a really interesting question, because particularly when you look at a number of the changes, a number of the projects that we've talked about, from IHT to dashboards to GMP equalisation, that's going to put a lot of extra pressure on what's already quite stretched administrators or administration functions within schemes. And we all know how central administrators are to delivering the right benefits to the right people on time. So I would expect the regulators' focus on administrators in 2025 to continue into 2026. We also have DWP's ongoing future of trusteeship consultation. That's incredibly wide ranging. It asks some quite searching questions about where DWP should be focusing its attention on trusteeship. So I think that will also be a theme for 2026. But if Stu will let me, if I even change the question slightly again, I think actually equally interesting is the amount of spotlight that's going to be on the government and on related institutions, because they've promised a lot. So we've got DWP and Treasury with the myriad of changes they've announced, HMRC's role in delivering things like IHT, PDP and dashboards, not to mention the pensions regulator in overseeing, supporting, enforcing all of these changes. I mean, there's just so much and such a wide variety of changes planned that I think the industry will rightly be looking at them to deliver that change in a controlled way and in a way that doesn't unnecessarily take trustee attention away from the equally important BAU work. So lots of people under the regulatory spotlight, but none that I wouldn't want to be.
Love it, love it. Great answer, great answer. Tim, Charlotte mentioned IHT. I actually just saw a client just for this, and they were saying they were particularly worried about the practical administration of that going forwards. What are you seeing in this area? And anything that we can do to try and talk to our listeners about, try and give some comfort or thoughts in relation to the latest developments?
Yeah, I think there is quite a lot that needs to be done actually, and maybe it's something that schemes have kind of put on the back burner and perhaps until the new year. But we now have the kind of final legislation that was published just before Christmas, so we've got a good idea now of what the framework will look like, and what the final rules are likely to be. Schemes have got until the 6th of April 2027, but that's only 15 months. So not a long time to get ready. And I think the key things that schemes ought to be doing now really is looking seriously at what benefits payable on death are likely to be in scope. So which of the benefits that they pay are likely to be covered by this? And how are their existing processes for paying those benefits and identifying beneficiaries going to be affected? And I think it will take some time to kind of map that out, and get those processes right. We are expecting further legislation during the middle of this year on things like information sharing, so between schemes and personal representatives and HMRC and beneficiaries, so that they need to look out for that as well. But I think now is the time to start, to really get to grips with what this means for your scheme.
Thanks, Tim. That's great. And just to round us off, so Tim, again, perhaps if I can come back to you again. So we've talked about some of the really big things that I guess most of our listeners will have had a good idea about. Anything else on your radar which our listeners might not have so much on their radar? Just other things to have in the back of the mind to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is the Pension Commission. It received quite a bit of fanfare when it was announced and launched, but we haven't heard that much since. And it's been kind of working away in the background, but we are expecting their interim report this spring. And I think that will be really important to kind of see what evidence are they looking at, and what are the issues as they see them that they're going to be looking to address in their final report that will be published next year. And I think really thinking about how we and the industry and schemes can engage with the Commission around that. I think another thing that will be really interesting to look out for is what the government says around things like retirement CDC. So just before Christmas, again, the government seemed to come out very much in support of that, setting out a timetable, looking at perhaps 2028. But I wonder if that may be brought forward. So something to look out for. And I think the final thing, I'm not sure it's been mentioned so far, is dashboards. User testing is underway, and I just wonder whether we may get a pleasant surprise this year and may get an announcement on when dashboards will finally be available to the public. I'm not predicting they'll be available this year, but I wonder if we might get an announcement. But clearly that will depend on how that testing goes and what issues come out of that.
A bit of a teaser to end us. Very nice. One thing we also deliberately haven't picked up today is more on Virgin Media. We're obviously expecting some actual guidance through at some stage, and just keep your fingers crossed, everyone, for something which is practical and usable in relation to that. So I hope you've enjoyed that. So a bit of a quick roundup in terms of the things which are coming down the track for 2026 and beyond. There is loads and loads and loads out there, obviously. So please do read the speed brief, which is attached to the email, which you'll get with the link to this podcast. And please also do download the UK Pensions Tracker, which will enable you during the course of the year and beyond to keep absolutely up to speed at all times with the latest position, all the developments on the things that we've covered. So just remains for me to say just thanks to Charlotte, Stuart and Tim for their thoughts and everything for today. And please do keep listening to Pensions in a Pod. Next one's out in about a month. Thanks all for listening to this latest Pensions in a Pod episode. To access previous episodes, please have a look at our website on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, where you can find them all stored for your enjoyment. We look forward to coming back to you in a month's time to give you the latest insights on what's really going on in the legal pensions landscape.